If you keep holding on to everything, you'll end up losing yourself. As we step into 2025, it's time to let go of what you cannot control and come home to the center of your own strength. Seneca once wrote, "Let go of the things that lie beyond your control." Letting go is not surrender. It's not weakness. It's the highest form of discipline. It's choosing peace over chaos, clarity over clinging. It's the quiet power of knowing that your energy belongs to what's within you, not what's outside of you. 1. Letting go is the highest form of discipline, not weakness. Let me tell you something that most men are never taught. Letting go isn't giving up. It's leveling up. You've been conditioned your whole life to believe that real strength means holding on. Holding on to the relationship that's already broken. Holding on to the career that drains your soul. Holding on to resentment that eats away at your peace. Holding on to approval from people who don't even understand your journey. But here's the truth they won't teach you in school, in corporate offices, or in locker rooms. True strength isn't about clenching your fists. It's about learning when to open your hands. You see, holding on is easy when you're fueled by ego, fear, and pride. Anyone can stay stuck in a cycle of control. But to let go, to truly release what no longer serves your growth, that requires emotional intelligence, inner mastery, and courage that's forged in fire. Letting go means you're no longer driven by insecurity. Letting go means you're no longer a slave to your past. Letting go means you've stopped trying to control the wind and started adjusting your sails. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Seneca, one of the great Stoic minds, once said, "You must let go of what is beyond your control." And he was right. Because when you try to control what's outside of you, other people's opinions, the economy, the past, you pour all your energy into a black hole. But when you let go of that illusion, you get something back: focus, clarity, and peace. Letting go is an act of strategic self-respect. It's you saying, "I choose not to fight battles that drain me just to prove I'm strong. I choose to invest my strength in the places that matter, my mindset, my purpose, my future." Look, you're not here to survive. You're here to evolve, to grow, to create space for the man you're becoming, not the one you're afraid to leave behind. And here's the best part. When you learn to let go, you become unshakable. No job loss, heartbreak, or criticism can rattle you, because you no longer grip things that were never meant to stay. You move lighter, think clearer, and act bolder. You stop reacting and start choosing. So if you're feeling stuck right now, overwhelmed, burnt out, anxious, ask yourself, what am I still holding onto that's weighing me down? A grudge? An old identity? A version of success that was never even yours? Now imagine the man you could become if you released it. Imagine how much energy, peace, and power you'd reclaim. This is your call to rise, not by clinging, but by releasing. Because in 2025, we don't carry dead weight. We carry purpose. So let go, brother. Not because it's easy, but because you're finally strong enough to stop wasting your power. Take the first step, unfollow that distraction. Walk away from that toxic environment. Silence the voices that aren't aligned with your future. You don't need more. You need less of what doesn't serve you. That's how you go further, faster, freer. Hit save, share this with a brother who needs it, and remind yourself daily. Letting go is how I reclaim my power. 2. The world is a mirror of your mind, not your enemy. So now you've let go. You've stopped clenching your fists around things you were never meant to hold. And in that silence, something shifts. But the question that echoes in your mind is this: now what? What happens when the chaos outside still exists? When people still push your buttons, judge your moves, test your patience? This is where the deeper game begins. Because once you stop trying to control the world, you're forced to face what most men spend their whole lives avoiding: your own mind. Here's the hard truth most never confront. The world you see isn't the world as it is, it's the world as you are. Your reactions, your interpretations, your beliefs, they don't just color your reality, they create it. That guy who irritates you at work. That family member who knows exactly how to trigger you. That stranger online whose comment ruins your whole day? They're not the enemy. They're a mirror. A mirror reflecting back parts of you that still need work. Parts you've repressed, denied, ignored. You see, the Stoics didn't waste time blaming the world. They turned the gaze inward. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you that disturbs you. It's your opinion of it." You can't always control what life throws at you, but you can always control how you catch it. The battleground is never out there. It's in here. Your triggers are your teachers. Your discomfort is your compass. Your judgments are signposts to your own inner limitations. And when you stop fighting the external world and start mastering your internal world, that's when the game changes. You no longer waste your energy on what he said, what she did, what they think. You begin asking real questions. Why does this situation get under my skin? What fear is this reaction pointing to? Where am I still seeking control, validation, or revenge? This is where the transformation happens, not in the noise, but in the awareness. Because the man who knows his own mind is dangerous in the best way. He doesn't crumble in conflict. He doesn't need applause to stay grounded. He walks into chaos with clarity, not to dominate it, but to remain unchanged by it. And here's the most powerful shift. When your mindset changes, your world changes. Not because the world got easier, but because you got deeper. You stopped seeing life as something happening to you and started seeing it as something happening for you. Every obstacle? A message. Every annoying person? A mirror. Every hard moment? A forge for strength. So if you want peace, don't try to quiet the world. Quiet the war within. That's where all the noise starts anyway. This is the invitation. Stop blaming, start reflecting. Stop reacting, start responding. Stop looking outward, start diving inward. Because when you stop seeing the world as your enemy and start seeing it as your feedback loop, you reclaim your power. You become unshakable. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind gets stronger. So before you look at anyone else this week, look in the mirror and ask, what part of me is this moment revealing? That's how you grow. That's how you sharpen. That's how you lead. And remember, your external peace will never outrun your internal noise. Silence the noise, and the world changes without lifting a finger. 3. Find the balance between yourself and the world around you. So now you see it. The world isn't attacking you, it's reflecting you. And once you've faced your inner mirror and chosen not to flinch, you reach a new threshold. One that most men either avoid or misinterpret. It's not about isolating yourself from the world. It's not about disappearing into some quiet cave of self-awareness and cutting off everything that once distracted you. No. This next step is about integration. It's about finding that sacred space between you and everything else and building a life that honors both. Because here's what happens to many men once they start their personal growth journey. They swing to extremes. They either become hyper-independent, cutting off relationships, avoiding commitments, walking around like lone wolves who wear solitude as armor. Or they become obsessed with external success, convincing themselves that their value depends on how much they can give, perform, provide. But both of those extremes are exhausting. Neither creates peace. And neither is sustainable. The Stoics had a different view. They didn't believe in abandoning the world, nor in being consumed by it. They believed in showing up fully, but without attachment. In participating in life, without being ruled by it. Balance is not something you stumble upon. It's something you choose, again and again. And real balance? It begins with this mindset. I am not here to save the world. I'm here to bring the best of myself to it. You cannot give from an empty cup. You cannot lead others if you're lost in yourself. You cannot carry the weight of others if your spine is cracked from your own burdens. Taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's strategic. It's masculine. It's necessary. That means setting boundaries, not because you're cold, but because you care enough to protect your energy. That means saying no, not because you're rude, but because you value where your attention goes. That means learning to rest, not because you're lazy, but because you're building the kind of stamina that lasts for decades, not just days. When you build this balance, something powerful happens. You stop overgiving just to feel worthy. You stop overworking just to prove yourself. You stop over-sacrificing just to be accepted. And in that space of aligned living, you become magnetic. Not loud. Not desperate. But solid. Grounded. Clear. You become the kind of man whose presence changes rooms, not because he forces anything, but because he radiates something rare, peace and motion. The world doesn't need more men addicted to hustle. It needs more men who know when to press in and when to pull back. Men who know that being available to others means being deeply in tune with themselves. So ask yourself today, where have I been overextending? What part of me is being depleted while I pretend I'm fine? What would change if I began to treat myself like someone I'm responsible for caring for? Because you are. Your life isn't a machine. It's a rhythm. A flow. A symphony. And the better you tend to your internal world, the better you'll show up in the external one. Not as a man who needs applause, but as a man who walks quietly, firmly, and fully into his purpose, with enough left over to give generously, not resentfully. Balance is not a weakness. It is warrior discipline. It is the decision to live with both presence and power. And it starts with one brave act. Putting yourself back on your own priority list, without apology. 4. Release the obsession to know everything. Once you begin to find balance between showing up for the world and showing up for yourself, you'll stumble upon a new kind of hunger. It's subtle. It wears a noble disguise. It convinces you it's helping, that it's necessary, that it's the next level of mastery. But if left unchecked, it will slowly undo all your inner peace. It's the urge to know everything, to understand every emotion, to dissect every problem, to control every outcome, to seek certainty in an uncertain world. At first, it feels like growth. You read more, learn more, ask more questions. You analyze every behavior, research every scenario, dig into every dark corner of your psyche hoping for answers. But here's the truth most men aren't willing to hear. You don't need more information. You need more stillness. The modern world tricks you into thinking that power lies in having all the answers. But real power lies in knowing what's worth your attention and what's simply noise disguised as knowledge. The Stoics understood this. They didn't aim to know everything. They aimed to master what was within their control and let the rest fall where it may. Because endless information without discernment becomes a prison. It overloads your nervous system. It traps you in loops of analysis, overthinking, comparison, and fear. You start confusing awareness with control. And that illusion will wear you down. You weren't built to absorb it all. You were built to move with purpose. So the question isn't how much can I learn? The question is, what am I learning that actually moves me forward? There is a difference between wisdom and mental hoarding. Wisdom sharpens. Hoarding paralyzes. When you release the need to know everything, you create room for what matters. Clarity over clutter. Focus over fear. Purpose over paralysis. Because real confidence isn't saying I've got it all figured out. Real confidence is saying, I don't know everything, but I know what matters. And that's enough. You don't have to chase every rabbit hole. You don't have to solve every puzzle. You don't have to fix every version of yourself all at once. Sometimes, the wisest move is choosing not to chase understanding, but to choose presence. To choose action. To choose peace. So if your mind feels tired, if your soul feels stretched thin under the weight of endless learning, ask yourself, what am I really seeking when I seek to know more? Am I learning from alignment or from fear? What do I already know, but haven't yet acted on? Because knowing enough is a skill. And trusting that enough is an act of power. This is your permission to stop chasing clarity through complexity. To stop mistaking more knowledge for more freedom. Freedom comes when you simplify. When you breathe. When you ground yourself in what you can control, your actions, your habits, your principles. And then, you let the rest go. Because the man who trusts himself doesn't need to know it all. He just needs to know what's true for him and live it with conviction. 5. Embrace your imperfections. They're not flaws, they're foundations. You've let go of the obsession to know everything. You've stepped away from the mental treadmill that confuses movement with meaning. And now, something else rises to the surface, something quieter, deeper, and far more confronting. It's the voice that whispers, "You're not good enough yet. You're still broken. You're behind." This is the part of the journey no one prepares you for. Because once the noise of the outside world quiets down, all that's left is you, raw, unfiltered, and fully visible. And in that silence, every imperfection feels loud. But this is the moment you must remember one thing. Your flaws are not the enemy. They're the proof you're human. And the doorway to your next evolution. We live in a culture that romanticizes perfection, flawless performance, filtered images, immaculate resumes, unshakable confidence. But that image? It's a lie. It's armor. It's surface. It's not real power. Because true power doesn't come from hiding your cracks. It comes from owning them. Think of the ancient Japanese art of kintsugi. When pottery breaks, they don't throw it away or try to hide the damage. They fill the cracks with gold. The broken parts become the most valuable, not because they're fixed, but because they're made sacred. Now apply that to yourself. You don't become powerful by pretending you've never stumbled. You become powerful by integrating what you've been through, by turning shame into wisdom, wounds into lessons, and imperfections into authenticity. The Stoics didn't seek flawlessness. They sought truth. And the deepest truth is this. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to be real. That means being willing to see yourself clearly, without harsh judgment, without comparison, without editing. It means saying, "I'm not who I was. I'm not yet who I'll become. But right now, in this moment, I am enough to take the next step." Because perfection is an illusion that delays progress. It tells you to wait until you're ready. Until you're more polished. Until you're someone else. But guess what? You'll never be ready in the way your inner critic demands. You'll always be unfinished, and that's the point. Growth doesn't require perfection. It requires movement, consistency, courage. And those come from accepting yourself, not someday when you're better, but today, exactly as you are. So if you're carrying the weight of not being enough, ask yourself, who gave me this standard I'm punishing myself with? What if my imperfections are not liabilities, but invitations? What would happen if I stopped fixing and started honoring who I already am? Because when you stop hiding from your imperfections, something miraculous happens. You become relatable. You become magnetic. You become free. You no longer waste energy pretending. You redirect that energy into creating, building, showing up, and living from a place of deep personal truth. That's not weakness. That's masculinity refined. That's leadership in its most honest form. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be whole, which includes the cracks, the setbacks, the scars. So let the gold fill the gaps. Let your past become your foundation, not your prison. Because when you finally stop fighting your imperfections, you unlock a strength that's unshakable. You become a man who is no longer trying to become someone else, he's simply becoming more of who he already is. 6. Choose peace over ego and conflict. You've begun to embrace your imperfections. You're no longer chasing a flawless version of yourself, but building something far more powerful, a self that is honest, integrated, and real. But just as you start to feel grounded in this truth, life throws its next challenge at you. People. Their opinions. Their critiques. Their assumptions. Their provocations. And you feel it rise in your chest, the urge to respond. To correct. to defend, to win. Because the ego doesn't die quietly. It waits. It lurks. It speaks in moments of tension. And in conflict, especially for men raised in a culture of dominance and proving, ego disguises itself as duty, justice, even truth. But here's the inconvenient reality. Most arguments are not about clarity. They're about control. You're not trying to understand. You're trying to win. To prove you're right. To protect your pride. To make sure no one sees the crack in your armor, even though you just learned to wear those cracks with pride. And so here we are, at a crossroads that every grounded man must face again and again. Not just in theory, but in daily life, in marriage, business, friendships, online. Do you fight to feed your ego, or do you choose peace to protect your energy? The Stoics were warriors, not just in battle, but in discipline. And one of the highest disciplines they practiced was restraint. The strength to remain silent when every part of you wants to strike back. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." That's not passivity. That's precision. That's a man so anchored in who he is that he no longer trades his peace for petty victories. Let's be honest, how many arguments have you won only to feel drained, heavy, and empty after? Because you won the words, but you lost your center. You lost your night. You lost your calm. You walked away with a bruised ego that still wanted more. Because ego is never satisfied. It doesn't want peace. It wants dominance. And here's the thing. The strongest men in the room are not the loudest. They're not the ones who clap back the fastest. They're the ones who can see the fire without needing to pour gas on it. They walk away not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because they understand the cost of trading serenity for noise. So here's the practice. The next time someone challenges you, pause. Feel the flare in your chest. And instead of reacting, observe. Ask yourself, am I defending truth or just my pride? Am I adding peace or adding fuel? What if strength in this moment looks like stillness? Because real strength is measured by what you don't need to say. Real masculinity is not about having the last word, it's about knowing you could speak and choosing not to. This is not weakness. This is warfare on your ego. And in that battle, silence is a sword. So let others argue. Let them swing wildly with their words. You'll be unmoved. You'll walk away with your peace intact, your energy protected, and your integrity sharpened. That is what it means to be unshakable. Not because you won the argument, but because you no longer need to. 7. Silence is strength, not inaction. So you walked away. You didn't argue. You didn't fight for control. You chose restraint, not because you were weak, but because you were no longer willing to bleed energy for battles beneath you. And now, there's a stillness. It's uncomfortable at first. Silence always is, for men who've been taught their worth is measured by how loud, how fast, how visible they are. We live in a world where noise is currency. Outrage gets applause. Opinions become identity. And being seen often matters more than being solid. But here's the paradox most people never confront. What's loud isn't always powerful. And what's silent isn't always absent. In fact, the most potent form of strength? It's often the one you can't hear, can't see. It's the stillness inside a man who no longer performs for validation. Im lang, dum mia qua no, kong fi la su rut lui. No la suc man duak ky lut. La noi luke duak toi luyen. The Stoics lived this way. They didn't shout their philosophies from rooftops. They embodied them, quietly, consistently, without need for spectacle. Because when a man truly knows himself, he doesn't need to explain himself. In silence, he recalibrates. In silence, he sharpens his edge. In silence, he gathers the power that's been scattered across too many unworthy conversations. Silence is not a void. It's a forge. It's where your focus returns. Your nervous system recalibrates. Your intentions become razor sharp. And your sense of self is no longer determined by the noise around you, but by the stillness within. So here's the question. When was the last time you chose not to respond? Not because you were unsure, but because you were anchored. Not because you were intimidated, but because you were above it. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't to take action. It's to withhold it, consciously, strategically, purposefully. That's when you realize. You don't need to post to prove. You don't need to react to every voice that calls your name. You don't need to be in every room to be influential. There's a power in restraint that reactive men will never understand. Because their strength depends on noise. But yours? Yours is built in the quiet. Let the world wonder what you're building. Let them speculate, provoke, misjudge. You don't owe them noise. You owe yourself clarity. And clarity only comes when the dust settles, when you learn to sit in silence without trying to escape it. Because that's where true kings are made. Not in their speeches. Not in their applause. But in the space between one breath and the next, where they choose not to chase, not to argue, not to prove. They just act. Quietly. Consistently. On their terms. So if the world is pulling you to react, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking from wisdom or from wound? Is this silence avoidance or self-possession? What will speak louder in the long run, this momentary reaction or the legacy I'm building? Because when you embrace silence, not as a retreat, but as a ritual, you become untouchable. Not because you're hidden, but because you're grounded. The man who controls his voice controls his world. And when he chooses silence, it's not because he's absent. It's because he's becoming more precise than ever. 8. The 3 levels of silence: action, thought, and being. If you've come this far, you already understand. Silence is an absence. It isn't weakness. It isn't inaction. It's power, reclaimed. But there's something deeper you may not yet have seen. Because silence isn't just something you do. It's something you become. You see, most people stop at the first level of silence, external. They don't post. They don't argue. They withdraw from the noise. It's a powerful first step, but it's only the beginning. True Stoic mastery demands a deeper descent. Not just silence in action, but silence in thought. Not just silence in thought, but silence in being. Let's break it down. Level 1, silence in action. This is what the world sees, or rather, doesn't see. It's when you stop reacting to every provocation. You're no longer pulled into every conversation, every crisis, every drama. You don't need to be visible to be effective. You've trained yourself to conserve motion for what matters. But still, even in that external restraint, your mind might race. You may still argue silently. Still replay old conversations. Still try to win in your head. And that's where level 2 begins. Level 2, silence in thought. This is the unseen battlefield. Where the real noise lives. Where you must learn to observe your mind without becoming it. Most men live in mental noise without knowing it. They analyze every scenario. They loop old stories. They obsess over outcomes. But silence in thought means learning to pause, not just your hands or tongue, but your inner dialogue. It's when you stop needing to label every feeling, fix every emotion, control every outcome. It's where space returns. Where you witness without judging. Where clarity arises, not because you chased it, but because you created room for it. And then comes level 3. Level 3, silence in being. This is the rarest. The quietest. The most powerful. This is when you no longer need to become anything. You are no longer chasing identity, transformation, or arrival. You simply are. It's not passivity. It's not detachment. It's the purest form of presence. You don't need to prove. You don't need to narrate. You don't need to seek. You embody stillness, not as performance, but as default. This is where real power is born. Because the man who doesn't need to become anything is the man who moves from his essence, not his ego. He acts, but he's not hurried. He speaks, but only when it adds weight. He walks through chaos like a mountain, present, unmoved, unshaken. So ask yourself today, where am I still loud in my actions, even in subtle ways? Where is my mind still filling space that could hold clarity? What would it feel like to stop trying to become and just be? These questions aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be sat with. Because stillness doesn't come from answers, it comes from the courage to not rush the questions. When you train yourself to sit in all three levels of silence, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop being a reaction. You become a presence. A presence people can feel even when you don't say a word. A presence that radiates depth, calm, and quiet confidence. A presence that doesn't just resist chaos, but redefines what strength looks like in a world addicted to noise. So keep going. Not louder. Not faster. But deeper. Because silence is not what you lose when you stop speaking. It's what you find when you finally start listening, to yourself, to your breath, to the unshakable foundation underneath all your striving. And in that silence, you don't just become the man you were meant to be. You realize you were him all along. 9. Simplify to set yourself free from the seduction of possessions. When a man finally finds silence, not just in action, not just in thought, but in being, a strange thing starts to happen. Desire begins to die. Not because he becomes numb, but because he becomes clear. The cravings that once pulled at him, more, better, shinier, louder, start to lose their grip. Not because the world changed, but because his center no longer seeks to be filled by things that can be bought. And so he turns toward the physical world, the things he owns, the habits he's kept, and asks the question most fears to confront. Why am I holding on to this? You see, we live in a culture where identity is stitched into what we wear, what we drive, what we display. But the Stoic doesn't decorate his hollowness with possessions. He refines his space to match the clarity within. Minimalism isn't about living with less. It's about needing less. Not as deprivation, but as liberation. Because the more you own, the more owns you. Every object in your space carries energy. It requires maintenance. It reflects old versions of you. It keeps you attached to identities that no longer serve who you're becoming. That's why a man who walks the Stoic path eventually finds himself looking at his life and realizing, this clutter is not neutral. This excess is not harmless. These objects are not just things, they are attachments, and attachments are cages. A closet full of clothes that match a version of you that no longer exists. A garage filled with tools for projects you'll never start. Subscriptions, devices, souvenirs, all whispering promises of fulfillment, none of them delivering. And the more you accumulate, the more you distract yourself from the only thing that truly matters. Being present in your own life. So what happens when you start letting go? When you strip your environment of the unnecessary? You create space. Not just physically, but emotionally. Mentally. Spiritually. You stop being overwhelmed by choice. You stop being distracted by novelty. You stop chasing the feeling of enough through acquisition. And in that space, something rare is born. Focus. Clarity. Strength. The man who can live with little, but move with power, he's dangerous. Not because he lacks, but because he is no longer led by lack. He can walk into a room and not need to dominate it. He can sit at a table and not need to prove anything. He can wear simplicity like armor because nothing external holds his worth anymore. So here's your challenge. Look around your life. What are you still keeping out of habit, fear, or ego? What are you afraid to let go of because it's tied to who you used to be? Then ask, what would my environment look like if it reflected my current clarity? What would I keep if I didn't need to impress anyone? What would remain if I let my inner silence shape my outer space? The answer isn't in another purchase. It's in a courageous purge. Because when you let go of what no longer serves you externally, you reinforce what is true internally. You send a message to your mind, your body, your soul. I am not defined by what I own. I am defined by what I embody. And in that moment, you don't just simplify. You ascend. 10. Break free from the roles and limiting stories you've been assigned. Once you begin to strip away the physical excess, the things, the distractions, the clutter, a deeper silence emerges. And in that silence, you start to hear a different kind of noise. It's not the noise of the world. It's not the endless scroll, the cluttered calendar, or the email ping. It's the noise of identity. The stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. And for many men, those stories weren't consciously chosen. They were inherited, assigned, programmed. Maybe you were told you're the provider, so you became the workhorse. Maybe you were called the smart one, so you became the perfectionist. Maybe you were seen as the rebel, so you stayed stuck in defiance, even when it cost you peace. Roles become masks. And over time, masks become prisons. But here's the truth. You are not your past. You are not your job. You are not even your personality. You are the awareness beneath it all. And the moment you begin to question those roles, those labels, those inherited blueprints, that's when you start to reclaim your life. Because most suffering doesn't come from reality. It comes from the story we've attached to reality. I always mess up. I'm not meant for more. I'm the kind of guy who never finishes anything. I'm just not that disciplined. These stories feel like facts, but they are decisions. Decisions you made, often unconsciously, to make sense of pain, rejection, pressure, or fear. But decisions can be unmade. You are allowed to outgrow the version of you that others became comfortable with. You are allowed to shed the role that kept you safe but suffocated your truth. You are allowed to stop performing and start choosing. Because every time you say, "That's just who I am," you give away your power to become who you're meant to be. The Stoics knew this deeply. They didn't attach themselves to status, titles, or personas. They returned, again and again, to essence. To the self beneath the noise. To the truth that cannot be taken, praised, or shamed, because it simply is. So here's your practice. Pause. Ask yourself, what roles have I been playing to feel accepted, even if they cost me my soul? What stories have I repeated so often, I've started calling them my identity? What would it feel like to live as the man I actually am, not the one I've been told to be? This is not about reinvention for approval. It's about remembrance. Because the man you're becoming, he's not a brand. He's not a persona. He's not a curated image. He's you, without the weight of expectation, conditioning, or fear. And when you shed the old stories, something powerful happens. You stop trying to prove you matter. You start living like you already do. You stop chasing belonging. You start building spaces where your truth fits without shrinking. You stop fearing change. You start becoming the author of your own becoming. Because freedom, real freedom, isn't about breaking out of the world's prison. It's about breaking out of the one you built inside your mind. You are not your limitations. You are not your past. You are not anyone's version of who you should be. You are a man in motion. And every step forward is a sentence rewritten. A role released. A story reclaimed. 11. Knowing you are enough, without needing to prove it. You've dropped the old roles. The assigned identities. The quiet agreements you made with the world that said, "I'll be who you want, just don't abandon me." And in that courageous shedding, you catch a glimpse of something rare. stillness without striving, self without performance. But right there, in that stillness, a final temptation lingers. Not the urge to become someone else, not the pressure to do more, but the subtle, relentless hunger to be seen. It shows up in the need to explain yourself, to be recognized, to be validated for all the growth no one else witnessed. To say, look how far I've come, and hope someone claps. That's where the next level of discipline begins. Because freedom isn't just about breaking the need to impress others. It's about no longer needing anyone to even know. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, led armies, governed nations, and shaped history, yet never once declared himself great. He didn't build statues of his virtue. He built discipline in silence. He led through presence, not performance. Why? Because when you are anchored in who you are, you don't need the world to echo it back. Let that sink in. The man who constantly needs to be seen is still performing, still outsourcing his worth, still feeding an identity built on applause. But the man who knows, truly knows, does not need to speak. Not because he's hiding, but because his life has become the proof. His consistency is louder than his quotes. His inner peace is more powerful than his arguments. His character whispers what his ego once screamed. That's what it means to know that enough is enough. Not as resignation, but as reclamation. You stop showing your trophies. You stop needing people to recognize your effort. You stop seeking to be understood by those who were never meant to see you clearly in the first place. And in that release, a different kind of strength takes root. You move without broadcasting. You build without announcing. You succeed without seeking celebration. Because you understand, finally, that the work is not for them. It's for you. And you are enough. Not someday. Not once you reach the next milestone. But right now, in your simplicity, your silence, your steady stride. So here's your moment of truth. Ask yourself, where am I still seeking recognition to feel real? What am I posting, proving, or projecting that my soul doesn't actually need? Who would I be if no one was watching, but I still showed up at my highest standard? Because that version of you, the quiet one, the grounded one, the one no longer performing, that's the most powerful man in any room. He's not loud. He's not hungry for eyes. He's not competing for attention. He's free. He walks with a calm that cannot be bought. He creates without applause. He leads without title. And when he speaks, people listen, not because he demands it, but because they can feel he doesn't need it. That is mastery. That is maturity. That is enough. 12. Turn loneliness into power. When you no longer need recognition. When you stop performing for approval. And your soul no longer rises and falls with external validation. What remains? You. Just you. And for most, that's the most terrifying place to be. Because it's quiet. There's no crowd. No performance. No scoreboard. No applause. Just your breath, your thoughts, and the raw truth of your own presence. This is where many turn back. They return to noise. To busyness. To drama. To distraction. Because loneliness, real, unfiltered solitude, can feel like death to a man whose identity was built on the external. But to the man who has done the work, who has let go, stripped back, stood still, and listened, solitude becomes something else entirely. It becomes a mirror. Not the kind that flatters. Not the kind that condemns. But the kind that reveals. The Stoics sought solitude not to escape the world, but to remember who they were without it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Because solitude isn't the absence of connection. It's the space where true connection begins. When you are alone, there are no performances left. No personas to maintain. No metrics to chase. There's only presence. And presence births clarity. In solitude, you begin to see what truly matters to you outside of others' expectations. Where your real values lie, not the ones you adopted to fit in. What you're willing to stand for when no one's watching. What you're still afraid of, and why. And from that awareness, a deeper form of power rises. Self-knowledge. Because the man who can be alone without collapsing. The man who can sit in a quiet room and meet himself fully. The man who no longer fears the echo of his own thoughts. He becomes untouchable. Not in arrogance, but in anchor. He no longer chases fulfillment. He embodies it. He no longer drowns in silence. He drinks from it. He no longer waits to be saved. He becomes his own sanctuary. So ask yourself today, when was the last time I sat with myself, not to fix, but simply to feel? What am I afraid I'll hear in the silence I keep avoiding? Who am I when there's no role to play, no one to impress, and nowhere to run? Because the man who can answer those questions with honesty and still stay seated in his own presence, that man is free in a way most never taste. Loneliness is not weakness. It is the threshold to self-ownership. It is the forge of inner truth. It is the beginning of deep, unshakable peace. And when you embrace it, you realize you were never truly alone. You just hadn't met yourself fully, quietly, completely, until now. You don't need to change the world. The world doesn't need saving from a man who's losing himself trying to fit into it. What you need is something quieter. Something deeper. A shift, not in the noise around you, but in the way you see. Change how you look. Change how you respond. Change the story you're telling yourself, not so others believe it, but so you can finally be free inside it. And if there's one place worthy of beginning, it's not out there. It's within you. This journey doesn't require you to be perfect. It simply requires you to be honest. To keep showing up. To keep shedding what no longer serves you. And to trust, fully, that peace isn't somewhere in the future. It's built in how you move, how you breathe, and how you return to yourself today. If you're already on this path of letting go, of simplifying, of reclaiming your power, then stay close. Follow the channel for reminders that keep you anchored. Save this message if something inside you knows it's time. And above all, keep walking. Not toward applause. Not toward noise. But toward the quiet kind of freedom that no one can give you and no one can take away.